am Benji Backer, as Heather mentioned, and I'm the president and founder of the American Conservation Coalition, which is a 2-year-old organization focused on bringing conservatives back into environmental discussions through a more grassroots, youth-focused approach. We have a team of 50 people. We've got 2 in the room today, Danielle and Carly, and really focused on conservative environmental solutions. And that's why it's so exciting to be here and seeing this movement that is growing so incredibly quickly. But the time for action is definitely now, and there's a few reasons why. So a little bit about me. I grew up in Wisconsin, was a conservative activist from the age of 10, and now a senior at the University of Washington in Seattle, incoming senior. And myself and many other young conservatives across the country grew very frustrated with the lack of environmental priority that was being put on by the Republican Party. Now, obviously, in the past couple of years, that has changed, but it's not. It's no secret that since CRESS and ACC and CEN and other organizations have been founded, the dialogue has started to change. So a little bit of a shout out to all of our organizations that have helped change that narrative and will continue doing so. But we represent 130 college campuses across the country. We launched our campus program in September of last year, and organically got 130 college campuses to sign on with representatives across the country with ACC and our message. That was all organic. And again, the reason is because young people care about the environment no matter what political side they're on, and they want action now, and they're frustrated with the political discourse in DC and beyond that inhibits the chance to make those results happen. And unfortunately, students don't know that corporations are leading the charge a lot of times on these issues, and that there are other economic benefits to being environmentally friendly. They don't know that the United States has reduced emissions 11 times more than other countries in the past 10 years, and they don't know that there are conservative solutions to climate change, clean energy, and other environmental issues. So while we've got a lot of work to do in this country, we also have to make this bipartisan, and right now conservatives are the group that are missing until recently. So young people care about climate. We've seen that firsthand. We've seen it organically grow. And although conservatives don't always hear it from the base, there's definitely studies out there that show that this is true. The Duke University study showed that in 2014, about 36% of Republicans believed in climate change, which is much different now, but in 2014, that was what they found. But when presented with a free market solution to climate change, 70% of them said that they would be willing to be open to the climate change discussion. So it's solution aversion. It's not that people of the Republican Party and the conservative persuasion don't believe in environmental benefits or climate change. It's just that they don't think that there's a solution out there because we've done a bad job of telling our story. And that's why we're here today, because there are groups trying to change that, and we already are. And another reason why it's really important is President Donald Trump's approval rating on the environment is actually his lowest approval rating out of any issue set, which shows that even conservative voters in his own movement are questioning that. So there's a big priority even from the base on this issue. And millennials and Gen Z, which I happen to be a part of, put this issue as their number one issue if you combine the environment and climate change. So statistics are really important, and they're important to look at, but so are real life examples. It's been really cool to see this movement kind of grow. And one of our greatest team members on our team right now came up to me at a fundraiser, our first fundraiser ever, and told me that he was a liberal and that he just loved climate and wanted it to be bipartisan. And he just didn't realize that there were conservatives that could engage on this issue. And fast forward 2 years later, he is an activist within our organization, fights for conservative reforms, and this is an issue that brought him over to the conservative movement because he thought that that was missing, and this was his main issue. He was conservative in every other way, but because the conservative movement didn't lead on climate and he didn't know that we could lead on climate, he thought he was a liberal. This is something that I hear all the time, that people think that they're liberal just because they care about the environment, and that's got to change, especially for the betterment of the policies and the future of the movement. In addition, we have our presence not just in blue and purple states, which is kind of the stereotype about this, is that it's just in kind of moderate states where you have to win to run on an environmental platform. Some of our strongest states that work with our student organization are Nebraska, North Dakota, Wyoming, some of the most conservative states in the country. And they do that because they care about the environment just as anywhere else. And so anybody that says that this is just some middle, moderate movement is completely wrong. Our strongest states are the deep red states, and that's the truth, and people there really want this issue to be a priority. So to kind of close this section before I hand it over to Brittany and we have a discussion, there's two things that need to happen for us to continue retaking this message. We need to change the dialogue and start talking about these issues more. Representative Gates and Senator Tillis and Senator Cornyn and many others have started talking about this, but not enough have started talking about it. And the dialogue needs to shift where more conservatives are talking about climate and clean energy as part of their platform and something that is prioritized throughout their entire campaign, their time in office, and afterwards. This needs to be a priority for every single one of the Republican members because they're losing young people and losing kind of just anybody that cares about this issue across the country. But it also starts with policy solutions after that dialogue starts to happen. And we've already seen that dialogue start to happen. So the policy solutions are ripe and they're going to be talked about today. We're proud to be part of the Clean Capitalist Coalition, which is a coalition of organizations like Crest Forum, Clear Path, the Grace Richardson Fund, focused on 3 or 4 different types of climate solutions that are free market and appeal to young people, ones that don't hinder the economy and also help reduce emissions and fight climate change at the same time. We're really proud to be a part of that because that's leading the charge for the next generation and offering solutions that aren't the Green New Deal so that people can transition towards a more sensible approach. So I guess I would challenge everyone in the room to make this a priority because the time is right now. There's no better time to fight for conservative climate and clean energy solutions than right now, and there's no more necessary time to do it than right now, because if we don't prioritize this issue, we will be stuck with whatever the left proposes, which ends up not really reducing emissions at all and really hinders the economy when you can boost the economy, excuse me, and help the environment all at the same time. So really proud to be here, excited to have a discussion with Brittany in a few minutes, and thank you all for coming. It's amazing to see how much we've been able to accomplish in this movement in the past 2 years, and thanks to Crest Forum for hosting.
Thank you. Thanks, Benji, and thank you, Heather and Charles, Larissa, everyone at Crest Forum for having us here. CEN, the Conservative Energy Network, is a national coalition of state-based conservative clean energy advocacy organizations. We launched in January of 2016 with just 7 states. We've seen rapid growth. In just 3 years, we've tripled that, and we're now in 21 states across the country. As Benji said, a lot of our states are in deep red, so where there's trifectas with the governor and both houses in the legislature are controlled by Republicans. We launched to really depoliticize clean energy issues and bring conservatives and those on the right into, to the table to talk about solutions that, as Benji mentioned a few times, are not just liberal, are not just climate focused, but how can we have a broader conversation about innovation and entrepreneurship, and focus more on market-based approaches and innovation and not just government intervention and regulation. So as I said, we launched in January of 2016. One of the states that we launched with originally was the Michigan Conservative Energy Forum. They were the first state-based group in this conservative clean energy movement in the entire country. They launched in 2013, followed by Conservatives for Clean Energy in North Carolina and a few other states. So when CEN came to be, we brought these 7 teams together really to try to connect them and support them, provide resources, data, research, communication, so they can do their work on the ground better. I come from the political consulting world. I used to work for a Republican consulting firm in Michigan, and that's where I got into this work originally, actually working with the Michigan team, running their communications, and really trying to make a change at the state level, educating conservatives and the grassroots and educating policymakers and engaging with them to bring them to the table and put forth our own plan. We're concentrated in 4 regions. We have states, teams in the Midwest, the Mountain West, the Southeast, and just recently launched in Texas this March. We really focus, as I said, on education and engagement and the varied benefits of transitioning to a clean energy economy. So we talk about the job creation, the tax investments coming into the states, really leading economically. We also talk about grid security and national security, and we focus on the environment in so much as protecting and conserving our natural resources is important to everyone. We work very closely with ACC and we work very closely with CREST. So I'm really excited to be here today, have a conversation with Benji, and discuss some solutions moving forward and what we're seeing on the ground with the grassroots. Thank you.
Great. So I'll just ask you a few questions kind of about CEN and your work, because I think it's really helpful for the audience to understand what CEN does and why it's so important. Brittany's going to talk a little bit about, I believe, some reasons why it's been so successful in states versus on the national level in finding bipartisan conservative solutions on clean energy. And I guess I'll start with that. Why has clean energy had so much success on the state level versus the national level? And you've been able to build that base in those states because of that. And kind of, what do you see as the greatest driver and future engagement on conservative clean energy based on that?
Thanks, Benji. I really think that, these are local issues and there's local impact, and people are feeling the high costs of their electricity bills. And now I think that's one main driver of why there's so much work happening on the state level. And really, I think the other one is just kind of gridlock. We've seen at the federal level that there has been a lot of arguments back and forth for years. And at the state level, there's more of an opportunity to really engage, have the grassroots engage with their state leaders and their local leaders and try to make a local impact, create local jobs that can't be outsourced overseas, actually bring in economic investment into their local communities where they're actually feeling the brunt of job loss, or they're feeling a lack of economic development in their states, especially in rural areas. So I think that's my initial take on it. I think there's a lot of opportunity with the states that we're into, being led by Republicans and engaging specifically with conservatives on these issues. We have the data to back up. We'll talk about this a little bit more, I believe, later. And there's actually a nice little infographic on polling between CEN and CREST that we just did earlier this year. But the polling and the public opinion is there. And what we've tried to do is really get the political will to be there. And it's increasingly there over the last few years. And now what's left is just that policy piece, bringing conservatives to the table with actual solutions that they can put and go on the offense rather than the defense against people on the left who are, really trying to push policy solutions that are a bit more heavy-handed with government intervention. So that's what we're seeing in the states. I think really what's driving change right now and where I see clean energy issues and engagement going in the future is, I think, on competition, property rights issues, electrification of transportation. So one example for, I'll say property rights in particular, especially in rural America, farms are really getting hit hard right now. And we've seen with siting issues and property rights, having landowners be able to develop their own energy and frequently clean energy on their own land and bring in extra money to support their families in addition to whatever their crops yield has been really successful and has really helped these rural agricultural communities. I think siting just in general is a big thing we see on the ground right now. We're working with various groups in our states to educate, in front of local zoning boards and commissions to allow clean energy development, biomass, wind, solar, and I think that'll just continue. I think we're seeing a sea change right now with moving away from that kind of monopoly utility system and moving more towards let's open market access for renewable companies. Let's level the playing field and bring more groups in so consumers have more choice. We lower rates. Everyone is happy. And then I think on electrification of transportation, that's something that CEN and our states themselves are just slowly weeding into. We've really focused on mainly energy in terms of, how are we powering our homes? How are we powering our businesses? But with EVs becoming more and more popular and cheaper, cost effective, we're seeing states and Republicans, conservatives leading on these issues. Just this past Earth Day, a couple months ago in Wisconsin, we had GOP lawmakers present a resolution to kind of build a private public partnership to increase EV infrastructure and charging stations across the state. And so I think we're just going to be seeing more of that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think additionally, there's people on the state level have realized that there's no reason not to be bipartisan on these things and have conservatives propose these issues. And unfortunately, at the national level, people just think that they're going to be seen as wishy-washy or rhino or whatever that might be. But in states, you've got the most conservative representatives and senators, state representatives and senators leading on these issues because they know that it's the right thing to do. They know they can do it economically well. And honestly, most national representatives could take a lot of lessons from these state houses because it's been really inspiring to see that thanks to a lot of the work that you guys have done. So one other question here that I have is, what's been kind of the messaging that's worked in these states, and how have you been able to kind of catapult some of this change? I'm from Wisconsin and originally, and I've been able to see kind of the Wisconsin Conservative Energy Forum just boom in like the 1.5 years it's been around, or even 1 year. What type of messages are working in a state like Wisconsin that doesn't really have a large reason to embrace clean energy, but now is, especially even from a conservative angle? How does that work, and what messaging is working?
Well, it's interesting that you bring up Wisconsin in particular. Being a pretty purple state, it goes back and forth. I think the messaging that is really has the most resonance right now is how much money the state is spending on importing coal, and how much money they are wasting and giving to other states and losing that competitive advantage. If they are moving towards embracing and deploying clean energy technologies in their own state, they're creating jobs, they're keeping their money there. I think, I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but it's it has to be like $1 billion that they're spending just bringing in coal every year from neighboring states. So that we've really seen the economic messaging is the most resonant, and not just in Wisconsin, but anywhere. Like I said, it's the job creation, it's the money aspect, just keeping money in the states, and then it's the competitive aspect, being able to compete and be a leader in your state, compete with other states, but also other countries now that we're, in this global market. So really just focusing on bringing market-based solutions to the conservative grassroots, to policymakers, and pushing and leading with those types of messagings. Again, I'll just echo the property rights issue. That's something that our executive director, Scott Coonan in Wisconsin, is really working on right now with agricultural groups. And so that's another thing, just how do we use farmland better? How do we supplement, the crop yields for these farmers and help them? Biomass in particular is really popular in around farm communities in Wisconsin, and so that's a winning message. CEN in general, though, we work with a lot of different conservative constituencies across the country. So we work with business groups, veterans, faith-based groups, and the like. And so there's a lot of different messaging that is really important to get out. So in terms of faith-based, being able to talk to people about, embracing clean energy and embracing policies that are both good for the economy and good for the environment, are good for the health of the mother, of children, of the elderly, and other vulnerable people. Being able to be more energy independent, stop sending troops overseas to countries to get oil and gas is really good to protect our national security. Improving microgrid technology and batteries is good for our grid security, protects us against cyber attacks or weather patterns that could disrupt that and cause power outages. So a lot of these messages really resonate well with the different people, and they're pretty powerful. I will say that don't take my word for it. There's a lot of polling on this, especially polling that CEN, ACC, and CRES has done. I think we've collaborated with both organizations at different times over the last couple years to put out polling. In 2016, post-election, 3/4 of Trump supporters wanted to see policymakers accelerate the deployment of clean energy. That's pretty strong. A majority of conservatives, as well as a strong majority of all polled, said that they would vote for a candidate who is committed to increasing clean energy deployment over one who doesn't really care or just wants to increase fossil fuels. So these are really important messaging points. And I think what we're seeing now is a sea change. I think we're seeing that good policy makes for good politics. So policymakers know that these are issues that they need to lead on. It's no longer about depoliticizing clean energy or environmental issues on the right. It's about leading with conservative solutions. And I think some other messaging that you'll probably get into a bit more are environmental ones. I will just say CEN focuses more on the electricity side of things, doesn't really focus on climate or on the environment. We'll wait in a little bit, but I'll leave that to you later.
Yeah. One final question that I think you touched on a little bit earlier, but can you give us a little bit more of a scope of how CEN has grown over the past year and how much you've seen change really in this past year? And then what's kind of driving that change going forward and in the past year? What has driven it?
Absolutely. So as I said, we've had rapid growth. We started in 2016 with 7 states. We're now in 21. In the last year alone, 7 new states were added on as members. So we kind of have nailed down this transitional point where we know how to bring on these states, onboard them quickly. The regional aspect of our organization really helps. We're not, a flat structure. We have regional directors and teams in those 4 areas of the country. I think part of what's driving this growth and part of what's driving this change is the success that we've seen with the initial states, Michigan and North Carolina, as I mentioned. They really started this fledgling conservative clean energy movement, and now we're seeing other states follow suit. But I think the answer to your question really boils down to the topic of this talk. I think the conservative grassroots is what's really pushing this movement. I think there has been a disconnect, and research shows there's been a disconnect between where the grassroots are and where leadership has been for, about a decade. We've seen polling just get better from 2010 on of where Republicans and where conservatives stand on not only clean energy issues, but climate and other environmental issues. And so we came about to really try to bridge that gap. As I said, we came around originally to depoliticize, but we're at the point now where we are actually forming a policy platform, and our states are working to help provide resources for local and state leaders to lead on these issues. And so our teams on the ground, are doing that well. Pretty proud of them. I think you're actually going to hear from our South Carolina team later today for one of the panels about little case study, so that's exciting. But as I said, I think it's those different conservative constituencies. I think that there was just really untapped potential. And as you kind of mentioned earlier, they didn't feel heard, and they thought that they couldn't speak out on these issues because they weren't seeing leaders, political leaders speaking out on these issues. And that's changed, and it's continuing to change and get better now. And so we're kind of along for the ride and really excited about making a change and transitioning further to a clean energy economy. Thanks.
All right.
Great. So speaking about polling, recently, GOP pollster Frank Luntz sent a memo to every Republican congressional office warning that if we don't take a stance on climate change, that it's going to be too late with the youth vote and just for the party in general. So can you elaborate on ACC's view on that first? And then can you detail a little bit more on how you think that young conservatives see the presidential administration and see widely the GOP and conservatives on climate and environmental issues?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. ACC's take would be that that's very much true, that we are losing, as Republicans, a lot of young support by not acting on climate and clean energy. Most polls, if you throw the environment and climate change together, which I'd argue that they should be, including the University of Texas Austin's poll, show that that's the number one issue for millennials when they go to vote. And it's just something that if we don't tackle, we're going to be losing a lot of those voters. And the Democratic Party is going to have, every candidate's going to have their own platform on climate change and the environment. And that's really appealing to people who are young, because if they don't know where they stand politically, which most people don't, then they're going to, trend towards that direction. And in our opinion, those policies aren't very productive and don't really help the climate change issue in the first place. But it's also a losing political issue as well. And then in terms of the second part of the question, it's something where, Donald Trump doesn't really talk about the environment very often. And when it comes to the polling, Gallup shows that that's his lowest approval rating. There needs to be a lot bigger dialogue from the presidential administration on these issues. They have done a lot of good things in many ways around conservation. And I think being open to the issue of climate change would really help the administration, because there are a lot of people within the administration who believe in climate change, like Jim Bridenstine, who within the administration on the cabinet, who changed his position while he was on the cabinet. So it's just really interesting to see the lack of priority of this issue from the administration, because even though it might not matter directly to the base, it matters a lot to young people, and it's driving people away from the conservative movement and the Republican Party. And we have a chance to lead on these issues because in all the above energy strategy works, free market climate solutions work, and the United States generates energy cleaner than anywhere else in the globe. And we need to continue telling all those stories, create our own dialogue, create our own message, and make sure that this is something that we champion and that we can look back on in history and say the United States led on climate change and clean energy, and the Republican Party led on climate change and clean energy. And that's why it is so exciting to have ACC and CREST be a part of that fight, as well as CEN, ClearPath, and many of the other organizations that are fighting for this every single day. But it takes us and the leadership of the party and the grassroots to make that happen, and we're doing it.
Perfect. So why, what are some examples of what ACC is doing really to build that support around environmental issues in the base?
Yeah, so I know we've got to wrap up, so I'll just answer that very quickly. So we're doing a lot of calls to action across the country on certain issues, sometimes broad on a certain topic, to show Congress and state houses that these issues are just important in general, and sometimes on a specific bill or a specific initiative. But we're calling to action these students, which are in the thousands across the country, pushing for these types of reforms and making sure that we're adding in conservative solutions and educating people, because they don't really know conservative solutions or free market solutions at all. So trying to start the dialogue first and let them know that it's out there before getting into the depths is something that we're really focused on. But it's also a lot of just engagement and allowing people to understand that these solutions are out there and that they can, go on hikes with their legislators, or they can, listen to a panel with the college Democrats and the college Republicans talking about clean energy, because we all might have different policies on how to get there, but we actually agree that climate change is an issue, that clean energy is the future and technology is the future. So why don't we talk about it? So those are the types of things that we're doing. We're doing education, we're doing activism on the ground, and we're also working on things like the Roosevelt Conservation Caucus in Congress, which is an exciting initiative that's going to be launching soon. And so trying to get the Republican Party to act more, and we're using that from the grassroots level, which is exactly what the conservative movement needs to get more action on these issues. So I know we don't have any more time, but thank you very much for all being here. I'll be around all day, and I think Brittany will as well. So feel free to ask us any questions. And again, really thankful for CREST and this amazing movement that they've put together with all of our organizations.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was awesome. Thank you. Yes.